Hey everybody, it's Bust with our coverage of the LOR Champion Draft Series Season 2. In this video, we're going to be covering the draft for the best team in the league, if not by skill, then by some other quality, I'm sure, the Bandle City Buster Shots. That's our team throughout this season. And so, before we dive in, the things I really want to cover off in this video is if you're wanting to see someone else's perspective, the event organizers have covered the global view of the draft on their Twitch stream. And then I'm pretty certain every creator within this event has put forth some type of content in regards to the draft. I know the likes of Mage and Bay and Cephalopod and Sir Termund are planning on streaming it, but I would assume that pretty much everyone is putting the content out there, whether or not on the old twitch.tv or the youtube.com. Otherwise, over the course of this video, I want to cover off on the rules really quick. I'm going to go over our draft strategy for the event, and then after that, we'll have the actual draft itself. And so, to cover off on the rules, if you're wanting to kind of follow along with the league, you can check out this spreadsheet. It's linked down in the description of this video. Takes you to this this Google Doc that has the full set of rules, all of the teams, the players, the champion picks, everything that you could want to know about the league is all encompassed within this spreadsheet. Help you follow along the season along the way. But to give you a quick hit of the rules, if you want to pause the video and just read it real quick, it's right here on the screen. To cover off with the draft, this is a snake draft. The players have been randomized. You will then pick in that random order, 1 to 10, and then it flips. And so the first 10 picks of the draft will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then it flips. So the 11th pick will be the person that got the 10th pick. The 12th pick will be the person that got the 9th. The 13th pick will be the person that got the 8th. This bust math is getting hard to do. But if you've ever drafted in, say, fantasy football, it goes forward, backwards, forward, backwards, forward, backwards. That is the order of the draft itself. Each champion within the draft has been assigned a point value. The better champions within the game are assigned higher points. The bad champions are assigned lower points. You cannot exceed 100 points of champions throughout the course of the draft. And then you don't have to spend all of your points. You don't have to spend all of your draft picks. If you want to stop at 8 champions, save up those points for something else in the future, more power to you. You have that option. In terms of the decks we'll be drafting in the format for the remainder of the event, it's going to be a round-robin style of event, so each player will play against each of the other teams once. The matches will follow the best-of-3 Riot Lock style of format. So if you've played in the best-of-3 gauntlets or if you've played in the Runeterra Open, you should be familiar with that, where you bring 3 decks, your opponent bans 1, you can't use duplicate champions, you can't use duplicate regions, and then being the champion draft series, there are some additional champion-based rules attached on top of that. You have to play all 6 champion slots within your deck, so you can't just play mono Kaisa, you have to have some friends to come and party along with her, and then you're only able to play cards within the factions of your champions. And so if you want to think of a classic deck like Misfortune, Twisted Fate, Pirates, that deck doesn't really exist because you can only play Bilgewater, right? Misfortune, Bilgewater, Twisted Fate, Bilgewater. You don't have any Noxus champions in your deck, so you cannot include any Noxan cards. So if you want to get a Noxan card into your deck, you're going to have to cut down either one of your Misfortunes or your Twisted Fates. You're going to have to draft another Noxan champion, get them into your deck so that you have access to the Noxus region. And so that is it on the whole. To give you a quick peek at the draft tiers, this is what we were talking about in terms of the point totals. And so the organizers of the event have gone through, rated every champion in the game. You can see Janna, Twisted Fate, and Victor up here at the 15-point space. The average bros, if you will, over here in the 10s with this Diana and Tarek column. And then our friends over here in the 6-point space, the Nikos and the Pikes of the world. And so, in terms of our draft strategy, I'm going to cover it off in 2 separate parts. I'm going to go with the overall view and then my actual intent throughout the draft over the course of the event. And so the first and foremost thing I have to say is I don't think the tiers really matter. I would expect, say, a champion like Janna or Twisted Fate to be like 30 or 40 points, something that's like really a hampering, really a hindrance in terms of your point total, and they don't really get there. The way I kind of did this was I started off doing a little bit of bust math. I was like, all right, well, if we've got to get 10 champions, we look out here in the 10-point space, there's a lot of really reasonable champions out here. We could get 10 of them. We really only need like 6 or 7 champions or so. And so it was like, all right, well, what's like 13 times 6, right? That's, I don't know, that's 78. Is that what that is, right? How do you do this? You got like 60 plus 18. Is that how you all do math? That gets us up to like 78. And so with 13 being almost like the actual top of the tier list and only a handful of champions above that, realistically, you're only going to have one or two of these. And I don't think we'll have any problem coming up with 6 or 7 or 8 champions. And so I've just kind of ignored all the point totals in here. I've re-tiered everything along the old bust system. And I think that that's going to get us to a little bit of a better and more cohesive approach in terms of the upcoming draft. Up next, I think you have to really stop and think about what you're looking to get your decks to do. Do you want to make a champion build around, or do you want to make a card build around? And so what I mean by that is if you want to play a deck like Aatrox Vayne, right? You can maybe replace Vayne. You can say play Aatrox Quinn. You can play Aatrox Garen. You can play Aatrox with any of the other Demacia champions, but there's no replacing Aatrox, right? Aatrox has that unique build-around ability to where you get to play all of the darkened cards, and you can't replace him. And so if you're looking to actually come out and play an Aatrox deck, you better be certain that you get a draft onto Aatrox, right? And so in terms of the champion build-arounds, you have to really kind of push those champions up in terms of value, as opposed to card build-arounds aren't as challenging to do. And so if you want to, say, play a Warden of the Tribes deck, right? You can just play like Nico and some Freylord champion, and you're probably off to the races, right? You got access to Freylord, you got access to Nico for all the beasts. You can just go and make a deck in that sense. The way that we're going to be approaching that is I intend to play concurrent timelines in this event, so I have this kind of higher placement of champions in terms of P and Z, but not necessarily as high as the build-around champions. And so that's going to come into play a little bit further down the line as we talk about the decks. I'm going to look to draft the champions that can hopefully help us pull that off. But I think that that's your kind of big consideration in terms of what you want these cards to do, right? If we take a look at these champions up here, up at the left, Twisted Fate, not really a build-around champion. You can take Twisted Fate and just put him inside of any deck, but if you move over to someone like Seraphine, or you move over to someone most definitely like Alawi, they're going to have much bigger deck building restrictions attached to them. And so if you really want to play an Alawi style deck, you better make real certain you get Alawi, as opposed to if you wanted to play a Cosmic Call deck, you just have to make sure you get a Targon champion. Up next, there are decks that do want certain champion combos, right? And so if we were looking at something like Aatrox Vayne, the thing that we have to kind of stop and consider is how bad is our deck if that doesn't come together. And so we've been making a lot of mention of Aatrox Vayne. We'll just continue down that path as we go. We'll say you take the first pick of the draft and take Aatrox, right? You've got your champion, you're ready to go. He is locked into your lineup. You really want Vayne, but it comes around to your next pick, Vayne gets taken. So how bad is it to have to move away from Vayne to play another Demacian champion, right? So if we don't get to play Vayne, can we play Jarvan? Can we play Quinn, right? Can we fit in another Demacian champion and not feel too terrible about it? Or is our draft just done at that point? And so, again, you have to kind of think in terms of the combos you're looking for with our champions, and then kind of rate them in terms of, am I playing this champion like specifically for this combo? Is this supposed to be like an Aphelios Victor style deck? Or can I, maybe replace something with something else if that's going to make our draft phase go a little bit smoother? Last but not least is how bad is it if you miss a combo? And I think that really kind of just depends on the order that you're drafting this stuff in, right? And so if we take our first pick of the draft, that is something that needs to be like comboed off. Say we really wanted to draft Aphelios Victor. We took Victor with our first pick of the draft. Some meanie down the line took Aphelios and we didn't get to play that combo. So now how bad is our Victor, right? Victor, he's probably still fine, right? He's going to fit in all kinds of other decks, but you might really, really want to focus that kind of thing up the draft order. But if we're talking about someone like Aatrox, Aatrox is much more kind of limited in the style of decks that he wants to be in. And so if we kind of like push off on drafting Aatrox, how bad is it going to be if we don't get the kind of combo champion we want with him in Vayne? Whether or not that's that we say drafted Vayne early because she fits in a wide variety of decks, or if it's because we drafted Aatrox and then just missed on the champion, we got to kind of like piece together which pieces of each deck is the actual important part, and then kind of decide if the risk is worth the reward if we draft the Aatrox but miss the Vayne, if we draft the Vayne and miss the Aatrox, or how bad things can be depending on the champions we hit, the champions we miss, and then where we actually take them throughout the draft. And so, up next, there are 4 specific decks that I'm looking to chase after in this format. I'm going to talk at them at a high level, and then I'm going to talk about my spreadsheet a little bit more after that. And so, first and foremost, I want to get Jax. I want to play Jax timelines. And so, if you tie Jax into the themes that we were just talking about, you typically play Jax timelines with Vi. I don't think Vi is that super important. There are a handful of champions that I'm happy to come out and play with Jax in that PNZ space. I believe I have it up on the screen here, and we do. Again, you typically play Jax with someone like Vi, but I'm completely fine to play someone like Caitlyn or play someone like Echo. I don't really care what champion we get to pair off with Jax as long as it's a PNZ champion. Now, given that a lot of these PNZ champions are exceptionally good, like Teemo, Seraphine, Janna, Jace, Jinx, Victor, a little bit of the Donger, and Vi, like these are all fairly high quality champions. I don't think it's going to be super possible to come out and play a triple timelines kind of lineup, but I think if we look to dedicate like our first picks to Jax and then maybe our 4th or 5th picks to someone like Caitlyn that nobody else really wants, we might be able to pull this deck off. Like the next kind of thing I look at in terms of Jax is if things go completely wrong in terms of PNZ, I'm still more than happy to play Jax with Ornn. Jax Ornn is still an incredibly powerful deck in the space of Eternal, and if things go completely wrong, I'm still okay to play Jax with just any Freylord champion, to where we're not going to have that high-powered Ornn at the end game, but Jax with the Forge mechanic throughout the course of the deck building should be kind of okay. And so Jax is kind of like the number 1 champion I'm looking to target. Like champion 1A, 1B, champion 1A is Jax, champion 1B is Jinx. And so I am also looking to have Jinx Draven in the lineup. I think that although we haven't played too much Eternal in this space, I think that Rummage is something that's very close to popping off with Jinx in Standard. And when we get the full complement of cards in the Eternal format, I'm really, really excited to play Jinx. I really want to be playing Jinx Draven in this event. If we don't get access to Draven, there's still a ton of decks that you can use with Jinx, much in that same vein we talked about with Jax, to where he can pivot into Jax Ornn. He can even pivot into like Jax Varus if you need to. Jinx does a lot of that stuff as well. You can play Jinx Lulu, you can play Jinx Kennen, you can play Jinx with pretty much anything and have some degree of success. You can even go out there and play the control decky versions of Jinx like with Echo. There's just a lot of really high-powered decks that we can play with her, but given the play style of aggression that I like to play and what I kind of foresee in this format that we haven't played a ton of, I'm really kind of interested in playing Jinx Draven. And so those are what I'm looking to make as my first 2 picks of the draft. I do want to look at Jax and Jinx as pick 1A and 1B, and that's going to hopefully be kind of the core of our strategy. Jax timelines, Jinx Draven. And then after that, I think our 3rd deck would ideally involve Poppy. Poppy has a couple of different things going for her. I really like a lot of the Poppy decks. She's very versatile in the sense that you can play Poppy Tristana, you can play Poppy Lulu, you can play Poppy Ziggs, you can play Poppy with Taric. There's just so many good decks that can get kind of tied in with Poppy. And then it also goes into a lot of decks that I really like to play, like things like Elites. And then as the kind of 3rd deck that I would like to bring into this format is just Champion Strength. And so the thing that I'm really looking to do here is having 1 Timelines deck, 1 Champion Strength deck, and then the Jinx deck, and then the Timelines deck I want with Jax, the Jinx deck I want with Jinx, and then the Champion Strength deck I want with Poppy. The other kind of side advantage to Poppy is I really like Poppy Taric in a lot of matchups. Poppy Taric gets completely annihilated by the ultra aggressive end of the spectrum and the ultra control end of the spectrum, but it's a super powerful deck in that kind of middle ground space. And I think that there's a lot of decks that we can pop between, to where if we have, say, like a Poppy and a Garen and a Taric, and we're able to play Poppy Garen Elites and play Poppy Taric as a kind of alternate deck against specific lineups, I think that there's a lot of play to a champion like Poppy. The last thing I want to kind of call out with Poppy and in terms of Nocturne is this event is starting in the middle of the balance patch. Riot has started kind of hinting to things to the future, at least in my opinion, in the sense that Yordles just got a bit of an upgrade, right? The Portal Pioneer, or whatever the Explorer is called, became a Yordle. The not Paparo, but the guy that boosts attack when you play a Yordle just got a boost. Riot typically uses these as indicators of things to come. And so a few months down the road, we are going to have the next set. It's going to have a Bandle City champion in it, and it's going to have a Shadow Isles champion in it. Probably. We haven't seen those happen yet, but I kind of think down the line, we're going to see additional power added to both Poppy and to Nightfall, which we'll talk on in just a moment. And I think that this is not only a powerful pick now, but something that has the very high potential to be powerful when the next set comes out, and then pushing into playoff season, should we make it that far down the line. In that same space, Nocturne. I feel like Riot has really been kind of piecing together this rework to Nightfall and to Fearsome. With this balance patch, we did just see the harrowing end thing get reworked a little bit to give the unit Fearsome, and I kind of feel like what we're going to be seeing in the upcoming expansion is going to be something tied in with Nightfall. And so I have been a huge supporter of Nocturne as it is. I think we've played Nocturne Callista in both of the previous Eternal Opens, or maybe two of the three of the past Eternal Opens. And so the Nocturne Mist Wraiths deck is something that I feel very comfortable with. I feel like this is a deck that we can pick up at the very end of the draft. And it's something I think that's going to be a little bit powerful, or have the potential to have a big power spike in the upcoming future. And so I like that like if we have this fully, this draft fully come together in the way that we want, we're going to have a deck that we never change. In Jack's timelines, we're going to have a deck that we never change in Jinx Draven, and then we're going to have a lot of like flex in that third deck space, to where the good generalist is like a champion strength Poppy deck, then the real width attacking power of Nocturne a lot of decks don't handle well, and then the Poppy Taric plays into a different variety of decks quite well on the side. And so I think that we get like a lot of flex value out of just 7 champions, and that leaves us in the space to where I think we do quite well against a lot of the decks in the format. Okay, and so now I want to dive a little bit deeper into our actual draft strategy. And so I know spreadsheets are tough to see. You can skip on to the draft portion if you want, but I did want to stop and talk about this a little bit because we're going to be referring to this throughout the course of the draft. And so over here in the first 2 columns, this is the point totals as assigned by the organizers. Again, I don't think that they make too much of a difference. If we ever find ourselves in the spot to draft Janna, Twisted Fate, and Victor at 45 points, we're just going to do it. I'll happily take those 3 champions along with like 5 other 10-point champions, call it a day with 8 champions, and have a really high power level. I don't think our opponents are ever going to allow us to draft Janna, Twisted Fate, Victor, and so it's kind of a moot point. But again, I don't think the point totals actually matter that much. And so what I've done, I've kind of come over here in this column D and re-tiered all of the champions in the order that I think makes much more sense. And so up here in tier 1, these are either just like the super high-powered champions, to where you can just, make a variety of really high-powered decks. That's going to be a champion like Victor, a champion like Twisted Fate, to where you have legitimate build-around opportunities across multiple decks. You can just smash that champion and know that you're going to have something quite good. Or they're just like really key build-around kind of champions. And so if we look at someone like Jace, Jace builds around into a lot of decks very easily. You can play Jace with Lux, which is incredibly powerful. You can play Jace with Heimerdinger, which is incredibly powerful. But as we kind of talked about with Aatrox, if you miss out on these champions, you can't play the flip side, right? And so if you want to play Jace Lux, you draft Lux early but miss out on Jace, that strategy's probably not going to pan out. And so up here in tier 1, we have just what I consider to be the real key build-around champions, whether or not it's a build-around champion like Jace or just a high-powered card like Gnar. The other thing I'll kind of note in column C right next to it, if you've ever drafted fantasy football, this can be a extremely useful thing, kind of seeing where your pick lies relative to the other cards that are available. And so if we say wanted to really come out here and draft Lulu, which I'm sure, I'm not opposed to drafting Lulu. She plays well with Tristana. We probably don't want to be spending our second pick on Lulu, right? She's a little bit further down the tiers. We can probably get a little bit better value out of someone up here in tier 1 or tier 1.5, and then we can probably risk it and use, say, like a pick 3 or a pick 4 to attempt to get Lulu with. And so I like to kind of space things out in this way. I think as we've kind of re-tiered everything, things aren't going to fall exactly like this, but I think it should be pretty close. I mean, we have champions like Ryze up here in tier 1. Ryze is a champion that has a lot of build around singular possibilities in Eternal. And I expect someone is most certainly going to be taking Rise quite early since he's just like the easiest build around there is. But I think this gives us, probably a good relative spacing on these champions. And so nonetheless, that was tier 1. At tier 1.5, these are build around champions that can just do something on their own. And so if you take a Lowy, that's a deck. If you take Leona, that's a deck. If you take Nidalee, that's a deck. You don't have to draft something else with one of these champions to turn that into a real deck. You can take a Lowy, you can pick any Demacian champion, you have a deck. Would it be better with Vayne? Would it be better with Jarvan? Sure, but can you play a Lowy Garen to a lot of success? Absolutely. And so with these champions like Nora, that are just single build arounds all on their own, that's what I look to be up here in the tier 1.5. Down here with tier 2, these are the decks that aren't going to be like your top tier decks of the format, but they do build into really powerful things that are meta staples of the Eternal format. And so we've gone on about Aatrox, things like Fiora Galio, Gwen with Katarina, Gwen with Quinn. Those are all decks. Ornn is in here. Like, these are decks that if you're playing on the ladder and you ran into like Karma Set, you're not going to be that surprised, right? Or if you're playing in a best of 3 format and your opponent comes at you with the Misfortune Twisted Fate, you're not that surprised. But you may not want to go completely out of your way to draft a champion like Misfortune because she only works in some very specific decks. And so these are the champions that I kind of look at as, being the real build around components to the third part of your lineup, or the support to one of the top tier decks within your lineup. Down here at tier 3, these are champions that, again, they come into some kind of meta staples, but they aren't cards that I think are particularly good, or they're kind of like really fringe in terms of being within the good decks. And so if we look at something like I was trying to think, like Annie Jhin is a deck that I don't think is very good, but it makes a pretty reasonable third deck within this format. Or Gangplank Sejuani, both of these champions are good, but if you just draft Gangplank and miss Sejuani, you don't have the deck. Or if you draft Sejuani but don't find Gangplank, you're probably not playing Sejuani. And so these are cards that take a little bit more work, but if we were playing on Master's Ladder, or if we're playing in best of 3, opponent comes at us with a Jarvan deck, opponent comes at us with a Pantheon deck, opponent comes at us with Draven Scion Vi, none of that stuff surprises me. These are all reasonably playable champions, but we don't want to take them early because they take quite a bit of work to actually turn into real decks. Down here in tier 4, these are what I consider to be kind of fringe playable. You can maybe use it as something to fill in terms of trying to play within a faction. You can use it to make a fringe deck like Echo Jinx, or you can have a deck that typically only plays like one copy of a card, to where you say maybe put one copy of Katarina in something. Or, if you're Grandpa Roji and want to just come out and take Talias to play with Talia Malphite, this is the kind of space to where I don't think anyone is ever going to be particularly excited about playing these cards, and it's got to be in that kind of filler space. So where we are talking about our third decks being like Poppy plus maybe with a Taric, or Poppy maybe with a Lulu, or Poppy with a Garen, you're probably not taking Taric and playing that in anything else, right? You have to have like a very specific reason to want Taric, and so that's why it's getting pushed way down here to the bottom. There's no real Taric decks outside of Poppy Taric. If you don't have Poppy, you probably have no reason whatsoever to draft Taric. Last but not least, down here at the bottom, these are the cards that I just don't think are playable. You can go ahead and question me on some of these. Ari on the list, and Zillion to go with Xerath. Like the Sun Disc and the Aris of the world all live down here. I don't think these cards are playable. I can see an argument for, say, like picking up Pike Rek'Sai because it's the end and you want to play triple aggro or something, but I don't really plan on drafting any cards out of this section, and I don't think that they really impair any of our draft strategy. And so again, to kind of tie back to that idea of what we're trying to get our lineup to do, I think I can unhide this and get our hopeful kind of draft strategy together over in this space. So again, with our pick 1 and our pick 2 at like 7 and 15, whatever our picks are here, I do want to go after Jax and Jinx. I'm ideally going to be taking both of these champions in that first round. I will be super stoked if we can piece that together. With our third and fourth picks, I'm going to be looking in this space of Draven and Poppy. If it does look like P&Z has a run made on it because everyone wants to play concurrent timelines or something, this may be the space to where we have to come out and draft a Caitlyn, but I would ideally not have to take Caitlyn until pick 5 or pick 6. This also gives us a space to perhaps pivot towards something like Trundle, right? And so you can play Trundle in a concurrent timelines deck. You can play Trundle in a set deck. There are some kind of like fringe things that really work with Trundle, and I will start to consider him in this space if something goes wrong, right? If we miss out on Jax, if we miss out on Jinx, we need to pivot into another really high-powered deck. I'm not opposed to picking up, say, a Trundle here, seeing if we can't hit a set or see if we can't hit a P&Z champion at pick 5, pick 6, and kind of salvage our draft that way. Otherwise, down here at the round 3 with our pick 5 and pick 6 space, this is where I say if we don't have a P&Z champion yet, we probably have to take one. Probably has to be Caitlyn, right? I'm kind of expecting our Caitlyn to be paired with Jax. If Vi's still here, fucking awesome. We'll take that, but I assume it's probably going to be Caitlyn. If not Caitlyn, then something like Echo. Ideally, we're not going to be stuck in this spot to where we have to play like Jax Ezreal, but I'll do it. And so I feel like if we really kind of wait to take that P&Z champion at like pick 7, 8, or pick 9 and 10, that's where you get stuck with Ezreal, and I'm really a little bit more interested in Caitlyn. So hopefully that works. If things don't work out with P&Z, we have to pair off our Jax with something. That's where you can start to look towards Ornn. You can look towards Varus. Hopefully things are okay there. Assuming we picked up Poppy at the round 3 and 4, this is the space to where we can start trying to find some of those other Poppy combos. Ideally, Poppy with Tristana, Poppy with Lulu. I'm fine with that. Or something like Poppy with Garen. The other idea I haven't talked about but kind of floated is taking an early Teemo. If something goes wrong with Jax or Jinx, I'll probably look to take a Teemo as our pick 1C, and then just look to play Elusives. I don't want to play Elusives. It's a very beatable deck if you want to beat it, but in the space that we had to take Teemo up here at a pick 1, pick 2, we now need to look towards something like Yuumi so that we can flesh out that Teemo deck. Down here at the pick 7, pick 8, that's where we start to mention Taric and Nocturne. Again, those are the kind of fringe decks I'm looking for the remainder. If we have Poppy, we can take Taric here. Nocturne, we're looking to just add to the lineup as a deck we have access to, something in the future. If we miss out on Nocturne, we can just be done with Shadow Isles. But I feel like if you're wanting to draft Shadow Isles, that's for some other champion like Vigio or Elise or some kind of controlly champion, not necessarily Nocturne. And so I think we can get him here. And then at round 5, we can just do the cleanup to where we pick up a second Shadow Isles champion so we can play Nocturne along with it. And then if we still need to pick up a Poppy supporter or whatever, that's the kind of end of the draft where our expectations are pretty low. And so that is it. That is the strategy. I'm going to keep track of the draft here on this same screen. I'll try and keep track of everyone's picks as we go along. Let's see how it goes. Let's dive on in. Okay, and so let the draft begin. Let's jump into the fun. And so I had initially intended to record the draft live, give our commentary along the way. And then as the draft started to approach, I did kind of realize that you can run into these spaces to where there's 6 and 7 picks between your 2 picks, and then you run into that spot to where people really kind of run out the timer. And so I thought there could be like 10, 15, 20 minutes between our picks, and that's a little bit too far between what I wanted to see. And so I kind of planned to commentate on the other people's picks minimally, and then our picks kind of maximally. And this format does let me kind of skip through here very quickly. And so let's go ahead and jump on in. If you're not familiar with how these snake drafts work, you can see on the screen how this is going to go. I'm going to kind of cover off on the picks up on this top right portion of the screen. And so as far as these picks start out, let's see, it's like Slay goes with Seraphine, Spids with Gwen, Serturman with Ophelio, Shadox goes with Victor, Mage and Bay takes Zoe, and Cephalopod takes Vayne. All of these picks are fairly straightforward to me. These are all very good champions. I'm not really surprised to see any of these taken at this point. I really like the flexibility that a lot of these champions bring, and it's not putting you in those spots to where you have to have a bunch of champions to work. Like you can put Seraphine in literally any set of factions and have some kind of Seraphine deck. You can put Victor in literally any combination of factions and have some kind of Victor deck. And so that kind of leads into this space to where what are we trying to do with our first picks? We want either Jax or Jinx, and I go ahead and take Jinx in this space. And my idea with this is I'm not like 100% familiar with these players, but I feel like on one end of the spectrum, you do have these players like Mage and Bay that are going to come out here, probably bring like 3 Ionia decks in every single match, and they're going to have to kind of draft with that in mind. And so I feel like as you have this kind of competitive crowd and competitive culture, that there's going to be a lot more leanings towards the control decks of the spectrum, but I feel like there's probably like one other aggro player out there, another FTPBUST at heart that would be super happy to just come out and play a triple Legion Rearguard lineup. And so my kind of thought here with this first pick of do we take Jax or do we take Jinx, I was thinking like, well, we've made it this far and it's been kind of safe, but I feel like if one of these champions is going to be taken, it's going to be that aggro player just coming in and taking Jinx. Like that would make a lot of sense to me. So we went with her first. Like I can see the argument either way, but that's my standpoint on it. And so as we fill out the remainder of round one, Jay Sensational does not take Yasuo. the big surprise to me for the draft. And then Grandpa Roji goes with both Action and Varus. That's a kind of theme that I expected to see a lot in this style of space, as to where if again like you're in the middle of the draft like we are and you want to play Aatrox Vayne and you take Aatrox with your pick 1, you have to wait 6 or 7 picks before it comes back. Someone may take Vayne in that space between. You don't get to play that champion combo, and now you have to figure out something to do with your Aatrox. But if you're in this space like Grandpa Roji or Jay Sensational, Slayer Spids, you get to take those champions pretty much back to back, and you safely know that you can play those like highly cohesive champion combos. So if I was to take Varus with pick 1, there's a very limited number of champions you want to play with Varus, right? You want to play with Action, or you want to play with Jax, or you want to play with maybe something else with like the cultist theme, but like it's not a champion like Vayne or Seraphine that you can literally slot with like any faction in the world. You're very limited in what they want to play with. So I think it makes a lot of sense to see Grandpa Roji come in and take Action Varus. I feel like these champions are something that you could probably find later in the draft, but you are at risk if, say, Action just get taken as a flex champion and then you miss out on that combo. So that's the only kind of like thing that seems a little bit odd to me with these opening picks like Gwen and with Varus in Action, is you could probably get them a little bit later, but if they're key to your strategy, then you have to take them and ensure that you get them. And so then moving forward, Jay Sensational takes Yasuo, no big surprises there. And then this is a kind of problem pick for us up next with L Games Brazil taking Samira. I haven't talked extensively about Samira. I've talked about wanting to play Jinx Draven, but Samira is kind of the backup to Jinx, or the backup to Draven, right? And so I was expecting Draven to be a higher pick than Jinx. The other Legion Rearguard lovers out there, I expected Draven to be the top Noxan champion taken, and not to be Samira at this point. And so it's a little thing to worry about, right? As we move down to that pick 3 and pick 4 space, we're going to have to really focus in on Draven, since we don't have any good backup champions otherwise, but no one took Jax. And so our pick 1, pick 2 went exactly how we wanted. We got our Jinx and our Jax. Our kind of backup plan seemed to be going fine. We aren't seeing any of the champions we're really looking for being taken. And so to continue forward, you see Kindred, Jace, Alawi, Leona, and Viego and Diana get taken along the way, and things are starting to shape up a little bit. Again, these really high-powered champions are starting to get taken down. If you're taking note of our tier list over to the left, pretty much all of our tier 1 champions are taken at this point, right? You still have Draven, Gnar, Ryze, Twisted Fate, and Vi hanging around. But, you know, in terms of the point spread kind of thing, I feel like our tier list was a little bit more on point than what you were expecting to see out of that. But continuing through into the pick 3, Slay takes Nora, very flexible champion, and then Spids comes in and takes Draven. That is a real breathtaker for us, right? That is a problem for what we're trying to pull off, as now our Jinx, we have to figure out what we do with, right? I don't want to play Jinx Annie. The only other like Jinx Noxus combo is going to be something like Jinx Scion, but you don't really want to play 3 Scions, and so if you're only going to play 1 or 2 Scions, then you have to find another P and Z, or you have to find another Noxus champion to really flesh out those 6 champions, and so this was a real pain point. And so like the only other like legitimate Jinx decks would be, say, like Jinx Echo, which I'm absolutely not going to play, and then something like Jinx Lulu, which I'm on board with, but we have to start really either putting a higher price point on Lulu, or we have to just kind of give up on our Jinx. And giving up on one of our top 2 picks this early in the draft feels kind of bad, right? And so we'll see how things pan out from here. But that was the immediate thing that I thought was like, oh fuck! So they took both they took both Samira and Draven, and we opened with the Jinx, and now we have to figure out something to do with this. But moving forward, Turman takes Ezreal. He's one of the PNZ champions, but not one of the ones we were really high on. Shadox goes with Elise. Mage and Bay goes with Thresh. Cephalopod goes into Soraka. And then what do we do here, right? Our Draven was taken. Everything else still seems to be available. I wouldn't say that there's been a run on PNZ up to this point. It's been the actual build around PNZ champions that have been taken, right? The Seraphines, the Victors, the Jaces, but not so much those ones we're looking for, like Vi and Caitlyn. And so at this point, I kind of feel like at pick 4, we can get Caitlyn. Like, I feel like there's a very low percentage chance that someone takes Caitlyn within like the next 8 picks. Vi, kind of up in the air, but Caitlyn I think is going to be safe. And so I don't think we have to focus in on PNZ, and that leaves us pretty safe to come in and just take our Poppy. And so that gets us to that nice space to where I'm really looking for here, in the sense that we have Jax. We're going to get to pick up a PNZ champion to go with Jax, so we can play like a Jax Vi or something. If we have to play Jax Jinx, don't get me wrong, we can't play Jax Jinx. It fits same into that rummage theme, and then you can still play Parts Made Whole and do stuff to where you have all of the Weapon Masters with Jax. Weapon Master dies, you get the equipment in hand, then you Parts Made Whole the equipment, you discard the equipment to get the 3-2 on board. You've drawn 2 for the turn, now you can play the Windborn Mariners. Like, we've dabbled with this in Eternal before Windborn Mariner was printed, and we can play Jax and Jinx, but it's just not on course with what I want to do. But outside of that kind of Jinx outlier, we have the Jax. We know we'll get a PNZ. That deck's lined up. We have the Poppy, so we can get all the kind of like flex combos that we're looking with her now. And then we just have to kind of figure out what we're going to do with Jinx, and then how do we flesh out this Poppy depending on what's been taken. So moving forward, Gnar gets taken, helping clear out that tier 1. Karma gets taken. I was very surprised Karma made it this far into the draft. She really strikes me as a champion that Mage and Bay would have just taken with the first pick, but she goes a little bit deep here. Slay didn't get to pair Seraphine with Karma either, so I'm curious how that goes. Then you get the wheel picks from Grandpa Roji coming in with Pantheon and Talia. As things move on, Jay Sensational gets the Katarina to go with Yasuo. El Games Brazil takes Callista, which was, again, kind of a touch awkward for me. I expected literally no one to want Callista. If you're wanting to play Shadow Isles, the pickings are kind of slim, but I really felt like we were going to be able to get this Nocturne deck going. And the best champion to pair with Nocturne is going to be Callista, right? She already has Fearsome, she's in Shadow Isles, and having that Callista taken away while Elise is already taken as well really puts a damper on Nocturne. So I'm still not opposed to it, but you do have to start to consider at this point as well, like this Nocturne idea that we have may not pan out. And so if you look at our like tier things here though, we have a couple of choices in this space. We can either pick a PNZ champion, which Vi is still up and running, or we have this note for Trundle. And the thing with Trundle, I didn't talk on him too much, but there's a lot of interesting decks that you could pair off with Trundle. You can play Trundle Set, you can play Trundle with PNZ for the concurrent timelines, or you can play Trundle with Feel the Rush. And so he has a lot of like really high-powered decks I'm kind of interested in, and so we can do either one, a PNZ or a Trundle, and we just take this opportunity to buy, right? She really locks in our ability to play Jax Vi. That's the kind of main deck that I'm looking to play in literally every single matchup, and so I'm glad to see her pop up as something that we can finish off at least one deck that we can just play in every single match. Up next, moving forward, Echo gets taken. There goes a PNZ champion. He's a PNZ champion, right? He's not a Shurima. he's PNZ. I'm pretty certain in that. Mage and Bay probably take something from Ionia. What do you got? He's taking forever on his pick. I'm pushing so many buttons trying to scroll through the video. God, did something break? Did I push pause? I just scrolled through like a half-hour video and it oh my gosh, I'm ruining everything. Get back. Okay, there we go. I think I fixed our technical glitch. And so Cephalopod takes Echo, and then Mage and Bay goes for Master Yi in that space of Ionia. Interesting next couple of packs. Shadox goes with Lux, so he has the Allowing Lux deck as an option, I would expect. This still looked like a fairly strong lineup coming from Shadox. If you want to play, say, like Alawi, Lux, Victor with Targon for the Cosmic Call deck, and then one other deck, he's really got it going. Sir Tarman picks up Twisted Fate, which to me is the like value pick of the draft. Getting to pick up Twisted Fate at pick 38 is pretty huge. I thought that he was going to go much earlier, and I was actually at this point starting to think that it's like, well, Twisted Fate's still here, Nyla is still here, and Misfortune is still here. And so like I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head that if Twisted Fate makes it around to us at pick 5, I'm willing to go like a little bit off course, but I'm not excited about it, right? As I kind of think back to the past Eternal seasons, I've been like on the brink of playing Pirates, but it's not something that I really wanted to play, and we typically haven't been. So I do like the idea of Pirates in this format, but the kind of, again, the problem with, say, like Twisted Fate Misfortune is you have to find a third champion to put in the deck to gain access to Noxus. If you want to play Twisted Fate Nyla, you have to find a third champion to put in the deck to gain access to P and Z. And those are things that I'm like super excited about. And so I still think this is a strong pick. I was, starting to mentally dabble that the thought of Twisted Fate coming around would happen, but it didn't quite make it. And that also clears out the top of our tier 1 rankings, except for Rise. Rise is still in here. I suspect Rise will get taken at some point, just given that he's a complete build around all on his own. There's a lot of decks that just can't beat Rise. I think that there's a very real chance that Rise can come into a lineup and then just have like a 90% win rate against an entire lineup. And so I expect him to get taken, but not like bamboozled. He hasn't been taken up to this point. So moving forward, Nyla gets taken, so that kind of combo with Twisted Fate is gone. Slay comes in and takes Aatrox, and then I'm curious who he takes to go with the Aatrox. You can see he pulls off that same thing we talked about with, say, Grandpa Roji down here with Action Varus, where Slay comes in and takes Aatrox Kane, basically just picks the entire deck with back-to-back picks. I think that's a very smart thing for these edge of the draft players to be doing, in the sense that, again, if you want to take Aatrox in the middle of the draft, you really need a couple of specific champions to roll around, like Vayne or Kane or Fizz. And if that doesn't happen, then you're just kind of stuck with a champion you probably don't play. And so I think that's a very smart pickup in these style of spots. Moving forward, who is this? Spids takes Kennen. I was kind of interested in Kennen. Kennen is one of those champions that you can kind of pair off with Jinx and play discard Jinx. I would rather have Lulu than Kennen. I was interested in Kennen since I think Yordles and Vandal City might be a thing in the upcoming set, but he was removed. Sir Tarman comes in with Vhagar. Shadox gets Renekton. Majin Bay goes with Rise, finally finishing off the tier 1 champions off of the list. And then Cephalopod takes Zillion. And so this is the spot to where I think to myself again, I was like, okay, like these people don't want to play concurrent timelines, right? Like, this is the thing, is to where I'm like, okay, well, I feel like we can probably get Caitlyn with pick 6. Like, I don't feel like I could probably get Caitlyn with like pick 7, pick 8. That's the kind of spot to where like the pickings are starting to get really thin. And do you really want to be taking champions like Ornn or like Galio? They're fine champions, but they don't get you into P and Z, and they don't get you into those like really high-powered cards. And so I don't think Caitlyn will make it past pick 6, but it does give us this opportunity at pick 5 to come in and take Trundle. And again, I'm very interested in Trundle. Now that we know Caitlyn is kind of on the table, this puts us in a spot to where we could play Jax Vi concurrent timelines. We can play Trundle Caitlyn concurrent timelines, have 2 really high-powered concurrent timelines decks, and then we just have to figure out something with Jinx. We don't even have to play Jinx at this point, right? We can play Poppy with something else and have a reasonable piece of like a baseline lineup. And so I really like this idea of taking Trundle at pick 5, assuming that we're going to get Caitlyn at pick 6. That still allows us to play Jinx in another deck if we want to play triple P and Z, and it allows us to really work this Trundle into the lineup in strong ways. I'm also kind of considering that Set is still in the mix. Trundle Set is one of these champions, or one of these deck combos, kind of like Rise, as to where there's a lot of matchups to where it's just like an 80% win rate. And I kind of feel like if we get like 3 or 4 matches across the season to where Trundle Set is just phenomenal, and then we get like another 3 or 4 matches to where we play Trundle P and Z, and then we have 2 or 3 matches where we just don't play Trundle. I feel like that's going to be pretty spectacular if all of that comes together. So glad to get him picked up here. Moving forward, L Games Brazil goes with Senna. It's kind of awkward to see stuff like this in the sense that Sir Tarman took Vhagar, and then L Games Brazil took Senna. And like, what are we going to, kind of work with these champions? Are you really going to push with Nasus? You have Major Bay with Thresh. And so it's like, I see a real fight for like Nasus about to happen, but I'm kind of glad this style of thing didn't really happen to us, where you see, say, Sir Tarman take Vhagar. He only fits in a very specific collection of decks, and then someone just kind of out of the blue takes Senna. And you're like, fuck, I can't use my pick there anymore. It's kind of a bummer. But cycling back around, Jay Sensational goes with Nocturne. That's a real bummer for us, right? And so with the kind of fringe decks that we're really considering, Nocturne just completely off the table. Just kind of is what it is, right? And so these are the kind of 2 things to where the draft has gone wrong for us, right? We didn't get access to Noxus for our Jinx. We didn't get access to our Nocturne deck. Just kind of is what it is. That dims the brakes sometimes as far as drafting goes. I'm still very happy with how our draft has gone up to this point, but we do have to kind of keep in mind that back end of our draft isn't going to go as expected, to where we're like, oh, we'll just take Taric and Nocturne and Callista and be kind of done with it down at that range at the end of the day. That's kind of what, if we're going to take Caitlyn at pick 6, that's what I would have foreseen at 7, 8, 9, to where we pick Taric to go with Poppy, we pick the Callista to go with Nocturne, and then we have like one other flex in there, but that's just taken away with Nocturne. So Grandpa Roji picks up Fiora and Ziggs. Ziggs probably to go with the Talia. I would assume Grandpa Roji just figures he can take Malphite with the last pick of his draft, but I'm curious to see if he's not going to come in and bring the Talia Ziggs Acolyte deck. There's a lot of decks that have problems with it as well. So moving forward, Jay Sensational goes with what you got? Fizz. L Games Brazil takes Anivia to put together the Anivia Rekindler deck. And then this is the point to where I start to really like piece out what we want to do with the end of our draft. We can take Set. I feel like factually, Set will not make it to pick 7, right? It has to make it through Mage and Bay. It has to make it through these other people that realistically want to be playing Set outside of a deck with Trundle in it, and so I don't think Set is going to make it. And so with this pick, we have to decide, do I want Set or do I want Caitlyn, right? And then the kind of remaining stuff to flesh out our decks. Now that Nocturne is gone, I'm thinking towards Lulu for Jinx, which I expect Lulu to make it around, and then we have Taric to pair off with Poppy, another one which I expect to make it. But at this point, if Lulu and Taric are going to make it, like, what do we realistically want to be playing more frequently? Do we want to be playing Caitlyn as a P and Z choice to give us a second concurrent timelines deck? Or do we want to take Set, which really only gives us one deck, right? We have to play Trundle Set. Like, I guess if we want to play Trundle Jinx, we could do it, but that Jinx is realistically never going to flip. And so here in this space, we went with Caitlyn to go ahead and pick up that second P and Z champion. So again, here, like, I'm very happy with our draft at this space. Jax Vi is going to get played in every single matchup. We have Caitlyn, which you can pair with Poppy and do something like Caitlyn Poppy concurrent timelines, but the Bandle City concurrent timelines really doesn't want a bunch of champions in it, and so I'm not super excited about that. I feel like we just need to pick up like a Lulu and a Tristana and a Taric, and that really starts to tie in what we can do with the remainder of our lineup. So Caitlyn felt pretty good to me here. Ornn gets taken, which there is some decks we could have played with Ornn. We could have played like Trundle, Ornn, Caitlyn concurrent timelines, but he's out of the mix, so that's not a thing. Agent Bay takes Heimerdinger. We were never going to play him. That's completely fine. Who moves forward? Moving on, Annie gets taken. That was a big one from Shadox. That basically says, if you want to play in the space of Noxus, you're not playing Noxus without Scion. So again, I don't expect anyone to take Scion. I think he's pretty free at the end of the draft, but the idea of playing Jinx Noxus at this point probably is off the table. And so it was a little sad to see Annie go. Like, I could kind of get on board with playing like Annie Jinx and a Legion Rearguard super aggressive deck, but there's just no Noxen champions left. Like, I'm not playing Jinx Darius, right? And so it was kind of a bummer to see her go. And so now down here at the bottom with Annie gone, I'm starting to try and outline the things that we can do to kind of piece together these Poppy and these Jinx decks. And so the ones that you can see on the screen, we've got Bard. Bard is a very interesting one in that you can play Jinx Bard, kind of like you see Janna Bard in the current standard format. You can also play Poppy Bard, which was a very popular mid-rangey style of deck maybe like 4 or 5 seasons ago. Like, Bard gives us multiple options with both Jinx and Poppy, so I'm a little bit interested there. Lulu is the big one that I'm wanting. I really like the idea of playing these Lulu Jinx decks to where you have access to Flame Chompers and Rummages, and you can rummage away a Flame Chompers with Lulu on the board, and then you have that 4/4 challenge, and then you have the 3 Windborn Mariners that you can put down. Like, I really like these ideas with Jinx, but I also do kind of like the Poppy Lulu decks, the kind of elite style, the kind of Yordle's Demacia attacky style, grow the stats kind of thing. And so, like, those are on the radar. Tarek is still here, of course. We're thinking of getting him very much towards the end. And then Tristana is another one that I'm quite interested in the sense that we can play Tristana Poppy. That gets us into a Demacia Poppy deck, which I'm kind of happy with. And then Tristana also has some other options if we pick up a Lulu. So that gets us into the space to where we can play the Bandle City Mayor style decks, whether or not you want to do that with Poppy Lulu and go double champion that get reduced in cost by the Mayor, or if you want to go, say, Lulu Tristana or Poppy Tristana and go for like the champion strength style Tristana decks. Like, it gives us a lot of options as far as these champions are concerned, and we're the Bandle City Buster Shots, right? And so if Tristana's got a Buster Shot, we kind of need to see if we can't fit her in our lineup. But moving forward, Evelyn gets taken, sure. Lucian is the next one up for bid, and now I'm sorry that the screen kind of cuts off what you're able to see, but I believe Slay takes Quinn here, so he has access to that Aatrox Quinn kind of Aatrox Vayne style of deck. Up next, I can't quite see what these cards are. I'm just going to go ahead and skip over those. Looks like Spids takes Sejuani, so I would expect them to want Gangplank on the way back. So Termin takes Maokai, absolutely. Jin gets taken for the Annie-Jin combo out of Shadox. Majin Bay goes for... does he finally take Rise here? I think Majin Bay was the one that took Rise. No, he goes with Nasus to pair off with the Master... Or to pair off with the Thresh. And then Cephalopod takes Rumble, getting access to that Rumble Vayne deck. And so now, coming back into this space, right, I'm trying to kind of calculate the number of points we have left. I did make a big note early on that points don't matter, and I didn't give that quite the credit that it deserved. I feel like points are a little bit more important than I gave them credit for, especially in this space. And so we have 18 points left. We're currently at 82 points of champions taken. Now, I know it's kind of tough to see in this space, but the important thing to note here is that Tristana and Bard are both 8-point champions, and Lulu and Tarek are like 9 and 10-point champions. And so we do have the opportunity to kind of push up into that 10-point champion space. I will admit that in my preparation for this, I thought Tarek was like a 6 or a 7 cost champion. That's not the case. Tarek is a 10. And so if we're wanting to get into this space to where we pick up Tarek with our last pick at 10 points, we can only take an 8-point champion here. So we have to take either Tristana or Bard if we want to come around and take Tarek with the last pick. But I'm sorry, we took Lulu with this pick. Lulu ties into everything we're trying to do, but that's the kind of space I'm starting to mentally calculate here, is that if we're looking to pick up that Tarek, we have to pick up a cheapo champion to go along with it. Both Tristana and Bard are 8-point champions. But the Lulu here is fine, right? Lulu plays with Poppy, she plays with Jinx. I'm very happy to play either of those decks, and that gives us a large amount of flexibility in what we're able to do. And so I don't want to have to play like 2 timelines decks in every single matchup. I'm kind of envisioning this space that as you go out and battle against someone like Majin Bay, you are able to bring like triple Bandle City and then just have the full-on fairies package 3 times. But if we're against like a more mid-rangey lineup, we most certainly can't just bring concurrent timelines in every deck. And so I like just this absolute ton of flexibility we have. and Lulu ties into that quite nicely. So moving forward, Volibear gets taken. Up next is Galio. Who do we continue on? Garen. And so I had Garen kind of on my radar here as Grandpa Roji took him. It's another one of these spaces as to where, what do we do with, say, our Poppy? We can play a lineup to where we could have, say, played Lulu Jinx. We could play Poppy, Garen, Elites, and then Jaxby as on plan. But with Garen taken, he's kind of off the board. And he was a point awkward, right? He's an 11-point champion, as you can kind of see out there. That would have taken us to 93 points, and then we couldn't have picked up Tristana or Bard. And so I wasn't super excited about it, but once I did the mathematics, I knew Garen wasn't a choice anyways, and then Grandpa Roji took it. So he got removed. Grandpa Roji follows up with Bard, getting the Elites package in Garen Bard. Again, I love how Roji worked this. You can see how within his draft, a lot of this dual pick stuff worked. Taking Action Varus as a deck, taking Garen Bard as a deck, and you can see some spaces to where it maybe didn't quite pan out. I know Fiora Pantheon has been a deck at some point in time, but I figure he was probably a bit upset that Jay Sensational took Galio right before this pick. Fiora Galio is a very popular Eternal deck, and he just lost out on that flexibility. He kind of has to play a lot of the Bruiser strategy if he wants these champions to work out. And so I do like what he did here. Garen Bard, very strong in terms of champion strength style decks. I do think Elites doesn't get enough credit, so I think that worked out nicely for him. Up next, Jay Sensational takes Nico. Not certain what he has in plan with that, but with any Freylord champion and Nico, you do have the Warden of the Tribes deck. And then here we take the Tristana. And so this is something that I feel like plays out quite nicely. I think Tristana is quite underrated here, and she's a little bit off the radar in terms of Eternal. But again, I kind of alluded to it earlier, as you do look at some of these lineups to where it's a bunch of decks full of PNZ removal, or it's a bunch of Ionian Rise style decks. I feel like you do have this option to play like triple fairies style of decks, to where you have Tristana fairies, you have Lulu fairies, you do have Poppy fairies, and then you can just kind of attack that way with your big spell shielded crowd of small units that are really tough to remove. And so I think Tristana is good there. Poppy Tristana is a legitimate deck that gives us access to a champion strength deck that works well with all of that early game stuff. But I would like a kind of finisher with Tristana, and we'll see at what point I kind of like get the revelation. I'll kind of scroll through here a little bit more, but I'm still at this point intending to take Tarek, right? We've got 90 points looking for this 10-point Tarek, and somebody messes that up, right? And so we see Set taken. I didn't have the points for him. Yumi gets taken, which I thought was kind of interesting for Majin Bay. I think Majin Bay got kind of lost in what to do with Zoe. Like, as I was initially looking at his lineup, you can kind of see he's going to play either Thresh Nasus or Thresh Heimerdinger as kind of like a Heimerdinger follow-up. And so it's like Zoe Jace is kind of like Victor Zoe. That would be a concurrent timelines deck. Or he's going to look to play Jace Heimerdinger as kind of removed from standard as the nerfs just hit. And then Thresh Nasus is going to be a thing, but like, what's the plan with this Zoe? I initially thought it was going to be Zoe into PNZ for Cosmic Calls, but then he comes in and picks up Yumi. And I have a real hard time imagining Majin Bay is ever going to come out and play Elusives. And so that was just one of these surprising picks to me. I don't have communication with Majin Bay, but the kind of strategy and style that you see him play, like if Majin Bay made a tweet that he played like 2 games of Teemo Elusives and said, I can't do it anymore, I can't do it, I can't play this shit, it wouldn't surprise me. And that was like the only thing I could assume that he was going to do with Yumi, is play like Yumi, Zoe, Vandal City, Argon Elusives, and that one just really struck me as odd. Like, it just says, like, I feel like he most certainly has the wherewithal to kind of discover that deck within his lineup, and then I feel like whenever it comes to like lineup building, he's just 100% never gonna play that. But moving forward, we saw Shen get taken. moves in with Kale. I think we're a little bit covered up in something I wanted to point out, but I can't see those and I'm not going to go look it up. No, here comes the problem, right? And so we have a couple of things left here on the screen. You can see I picked up Scion. We can play Jinx Scion. I have kind of like pieced together in my head that if we really want to, we can play like 3 copies of Jinx, 1 copy of Caitlyn, 2 copies of Scion, and then just be kind of upset that we don't have Draven. But I'm just like, man, it's so rough to play like Scion discard aggro without Draven. Like Draven is such a key build around into that. I kind of start to think it's like, well, you do play stuff like Draven, Scion, Vi, maybe like Vi Draven or Vi Scion kind of working. It's like, this is all bullshit. This stuff just doesn't work. I'm not really interested in any of that. And so, like, what happens if somebody takes Taric, which you're about to see, right? Sir Turman took Vladimir, Shadox takes Taric, and I'm like, fuck, like, why are you going to take Taric? Are you playing Shen Taric? Like, what piece of your lineup is actually going to involve Taric? Other than maybe you play like Victor Taric and try and have that be a Cosmic Call lineup, right? So you want to play Victor Cosmic Call, you have to pick up a Targon champion to actually get the Cosmic Calls, and then that's it. That's what's left, so you take it. But as I like put Hecarim on the screen, I was thinking of Hecarim in a couple of different angles, right? And so the number one thing with Hecarim was the access to Tristana, right? The Tristana Atrocity deck is quite good. And so this does put us in a space to where you can play Tristana Poppy and have a Demacia-based champion strength Tristana deck, or we could say play 2 or 3 copies of Tristana, 2 or 3 copies of one of our Bandle City champions, either Lulu or Poppy, and then 1 copy of Hecarim. And that gets us into the space to where Hecarim is still a strong fucking attacker. Like, he's a 5/6 overwhelm for 6. That's not a bad deal. And he gets us access to Shadow Isles, so then we can play Atrocity and we can play the Vengeances that typically come along with that deck. But the other kind of like side angle with Hecarim that I was really excited about is we could play Hecarim with Trundle and play it in a Feel the Rush deck, right? You typically play Trundle Feel the Rush with Tryndamere, 3 copies of Trundle, 2 copies of Tryndamere, but we do have access to Hecarim. Hecarim has Overwhelm. Like, that is my big key point with playing Feel the Rush if you're out there playing Singleton or whatever, is that you have to have Overwhelm elusive style champions, and Hecarim with Overwhelm fits, and that does let us play a Feel the Rush style of Prey Lord Shadow Isles. And so I was really like hype that I kind of picked up on the idea of Hecarim here. I think he works fantastically with the Tristana and with the Poppy and with the Trundle. Lets us be in this space to where if we're in like a very pure mid-range on mid-range style of matchup, we can say play Jax Vi, we can play Caitlyn with something else, and then we can play the Feel the Rush. And so we'll have 2 concurrent timeline stacks along with Feel the Rush. That should be incredibly powerful against the spaces of just kind of pure mid-range style of decks. And so that is what we snatched up with our last pick of the draft here. You can see Ash taking Xerath, and we finish off with Hecarim. So we can cycle through the remaining champions through here. I feel like, you know, I did a pretty good job over here re-tiering this stuff. I feel like the draft board got blackened out and pretty much on track order in terms of the spaces that the champions were coming out, and then my tier list. There's of course some champion differences along the way, but if you look here, we're about just halfway through the draft, and most of the champions are kind of X'd out. I think that we nailed that pretty well. But finishing off with the champions that don't matter as much, Elgames Brazil takes Tryndamere, Jay Sensational goes with Udyr, Grandpa Roji gets his Malphite to go along with Talia, and then he finishes off with Ahri, Lee Sin, I see the Irelia, Jack, Nami, just a bunch of champions that don't quite matter. And so there's a couple of things I thought were interesting here at the end of the draft. I'm not entirely certain how the rules work, but you can see Sir Tarman skipped on his last champion pick with 8. And while I am happy with our lineup, I think that's a very fantastic thing to do, because you do have the option to trade champions within this format. I've been kind of looking at the Draven lineups and the Samira lineups to see if there isn't some kind of trade we can make to pick up one of those champions, but not only may it not work like strategically to where it doesn't feel like a a positive trade for both teams. I'm lacking in points, so I can't really come in and make any of those trades. I think you can drop a champion, just kick a champion off your roster so that you have more points. Maybe that's a thing, I don't know. But I without knowing the full knowledge of like those intricacies of the rules, I think Sir Turmund made a very intelligent no pick here right at the end. Save those 8 points, and now if he wants to trade, I don't know, like Evelyn, is she like an 8-point champion for a 12-point champion on someone else's team? He has the flexibility with the remaining points. And so I think a lot of these picks here at the end weren't that great, like Cramparogi's Ari, Elgain's Brazil's Irelia. I feel like these are champions they're probably just literally never going to play. But like Lee Sin, sure, you could play Lee Sin. But I think those are fairly weak as to where Sir Turmund just saying, nah, I'm going to pass on that last pick and just bank up these points. I think that was a very good idea. And so to wrap things up, I wanted to kind of talk about the deck lists. I think that we can really kind of put together right out the start. I like a lot of the combos that we're able to kind of really piece together with what we have, and I kind of wanted to bring them up as we'll likely see them across the remainder of the season. And so again, we mentioned Jinx. She was the one that oops, I got caps lock on. Why not have caps lock on? This was the one that turned out as a bit of an oopsies, right? We wanted to have Jinx with a Nox and champion. That didn't quite come together, but you can still play Jinx Jax. We talked about this one in terms of having the discard package where you're discarding a bunch of Weapon Master style of equipment. That can most certainly be a thing. You have Jinx Lulu Vandal City, which is the kind of discard Boom Baboon style of deck that we're looking to play, and I think that that's probably the space to where we'll start to see the majority of our Jinx options if we do play her. Jax, this is the one that I kind of expect to be our big one. We've already mentioned Jinx Jax, but Jax Vi is of course the big superstar deck that we're really looking to take advantage of in this format. I especially like it given that one of the kind of main problems with the Concurrent Timelines deck is they do tend to struggle with stuff like Cosmic Call. But given the way that this format's set up, we shouldn't have to play against too much of the Cosmic Call style decks. We should be able to just ban the good one, even if the opponent has access to multiple copies of that style of thing. And so quite happy to have access to a deck like Jax Vi, but it can also come and pair out with things like Jax Tristana, as to where you can use the Weapon Masters as your multi-faction units, and then you have a bunch of multi-factions to activate the Tristana. That's been kind of a fringe playable deck. I don't think it's something that we're really going to be coming in and touching in on, but the opportunities are there. And so again, Poppy, this is our kind of second always playing, if you will. I do love playing Poppy. She's one of my favorites, and she fits in with a handful of things here, right? So Poppy Lulu is going to be a big one. This tends to be a board control based deck, kind of like Scouts, as to where you're playing Fleet Feather Trackers and you're playing Petricite Broadwings. Those units get boosted extremely well with Lulu. You get to play stuff like Vandal City Mayor, since it gets to cheapen up your Poppy and your Lulu, and then you can also come out and play stuff like the Forge Weapon Master, right? The Demacia Freylord one. He fits in this thing kind of well, and then it also lands as to being kind of a rally champion strength-based deck. We've played a fair amount of this, and I've been reasonably happy with it. Otherwise, we don't have too many combos with Poppy. She doesn't play spectacularly well with this other stuff, but if we're like really wanting to triple timelines, we can come in and play something like Poppy Caitlyn and do something there. And so that's on the table. The other big one with Poppy is, of course, going to be Tristana. Whether or not you use Poppy as a BC or you use right, let me phrase this a little better, right? You can do Demacia BC with Poppy Tristana, or you have the option to say BC, both of these champions, and then include Hecarim. And so I'm kind of interested in this space as well. I don't think this is something that we'll do with Poppy, right? Because if you're playing the Atrocity package, you typically don't want to be playing Poppies. This is something you would probably do with, say, Lulu, Tristana, Hecarim. But the option is there, and so we'll keep that in mind as things go on. It's a little bit more awkward with the Poppy. Like, I really wanted that Taric. Taric does a lot of nice flexing with this Poppy to where you can, say, play Poppy Lulu, have that really strong board control, go wide style of thing. And then if you have Poppy Taric as the kind of like, oh, we're just gonna fuck around and stare at each other for 10 minutes and see who can do the most powerful thing, Poppy Taric is extremely powerful in terms of outpowering the opponent. So that didn't quite pan out, but it is what it is. So to move forward, we have both Vi and Caitlyn. These are just timelines champions, right? I suspect as far as timelines goes, we're really only interested in playing Jax or Freljord. I don't even know if we have other options. We play Bandle City. Like, Bandle City is the only other one that you can kind of squeak in, but you know, the Banana Blaster deck typically doesn't want a bunch of champions in it. Now, the thing I want to say with tie lines that I haven't really hit on at this point are Explorers. I expect the Explorers to be kind of pivotal in this upcoming Eternal format. Just being able to say, like, okay, well, I have to play against Action. Now the Explorers can blow up the stupid equipment. Or I have to play against the Seraphine pile. I have ways to blow up back alley bars. I have ways to blow up Sunken Temples. Like, they give you so many options all the way across the board, and they work nicely with concurrent timelines. So you can play your 1/1 attune for 2 mana, get your refund on the mana, and then change your 1/1 of stats into 2 stats. Like, it's just such a good deal with all of the Explorers. That is one of the big reasons I really wanted to jump into all of these concurrent timelines decks that I haven't touched on too hard. So while I do have in mind that the Freylord and the Jax are the big ones, it's not to say that something won't happen to where I'm not interested in playing a different combo, likely Bandle City, because that's where the good cheap Yordle one is, but those options are kind of there. So up next, we have Trundle. We've already hinted on timelines. That is fine. And then, of course, the kind of Feel the Rush style Hecarim deck, which is the other one that I kind of like to keep. And the back end, I feel like there's a lot of decks that really struggle against the Vile Feast drain-based removal, and having Feel the Rush in here. Just a nice option, a nice flex space to where Hecarim can either fit in with the timelines, fit in with Tristana or fit in with Trundle. Otherwise, I feel like that's the end of the line. We hit Lulu, Tristana, and Hecarim. Those are all kind of supporty style champions to see across the rest of the way, right? We have Lulu Poppy, Lulu Tristana, Lulu Jinx. We hit on all those. We have Tristana Poppy, Tristana Lulu, Tristana Hecarim. We hit on all of those, and then Hecarim fitting in with timelines and hitting in. So I feel like this collection, this thing that I've really just put on the screen here, is what really helps drive home our lineup in terms of strength. I feel like, not to pick on anyone in particular, but there's a lot of lineups out here that are just kind of like singularly focused, in the sense that they probably have like 2, maybe 3 real decks, and then they don't have much flexibility. And I really think that we have a wonderful space here as to where, if we're, you know, if we are up against, say, Mage and Bay, and like, if you want to say like Bay's triple Ionia, you can do stuff, say like, oh man, we got busts, triple BC birds, right? And so that's just kind of like one angle that you can flex. Or if you're up against, you know, player 2's generic mid-range matchups, you can go with like 2x timelines for the rush, right? And so, like, there's just a lot of flexibility in what our lineup is capable of doing, and the flexibility that we have doesn't involve playing bad decks. So I'm really happy with how the draft went, and this went pretty spectacularly. Because as it goes, like, I'll be the first to admit that we've talked about Mage and Bay quite a bit with this. We'll continue on with him. I feel like if you said, hey, Mage and Bay, you're going to play Bust in a show match for $500. You have the choice. Do you want to play one best of 3, or do you want to play one best of 15? He's going to say best of 15 every time, and I'm going to say best of 3 every time, right? It's just like, I'm willing and ready to admit that his technical skill level is much higher than mine, but I feel like in terms of our draft, if our draft wasn't the number one out of the entire 10, I feel like we most certainly have a top 3 draft. So that's the kind of space to where we could start to get an edge against these players like Major Bay and Grandpa Roji that have been Worlds competitors in the past. I know Shadox is another one I'm familiar with that he seems to top cut every single open. These players are absolutely better than me, but ideally we can catch a bit of an advantage with how our draft went and bring strong lineups along the way. So we'll see. I think we have a great chance to be competitive with this lineup. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I hope you are too. That for us today. So I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way. You had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being